A Baroque castle glows golden in the evening light as the sun begins its descent toward the Austrian Alps. 400 guests in evening gowns and tailored suits gather beneath crystal chandeliers to celebrate the wedding of Katharina Brunner, beloved granddaughter of one of Austria's most respected industrialists. Her grandfather, 81-year-old Wilhelm Brunner, sits at the head table with tears glistening in his eyes as he watches his granddaughter exchange vows with a young banker from Vienna. He built a textile empire from nothing after the devastation of war. He donated millions to charities across Austria and Germany. He received Austria's highest civilian honor for his contributions to industry and community. Tonight, surrounded by 3 generations of adoring family, he believes his legacy is forever secure. What Wilhelm Brunner doesn't know is that the string quartet playing Pachelbel's Canon includes a violinist who served 8 years in the Israeli Defense Forces. The wedding photographer adjusting his telephoto lens spent 3 years tracking Nazi war criminals across South America and Eastern Europe. The sommelier carefully selecting wines from the castle cellar studied advanced toxicology at Tel Aviv University, and the elegant elderly woman now approaching his table with a warm, knowing smile carries in her beaded evening bag a syringe containing a synthetic compound that will stop his heart within 6 hours, leaving absolutely no trace that modern forensic science can detect. In 1943, this distinguished patriarch was not Wilhelm Brunner. He was SS-Hauptsturmführer Viktor Brenner, commandant of a subcamp in the Mauthausen concentration camp system, where 4,700 Jewish prisoners were systematically worked to death, shot in mass executions, or transported to gas chambers at larger extermination facilities. For 60 years, he has lived comfortably under a stolen identity, building enormous wealth and unimpeachable social standing on foundations of ash and human bone. Tonight, the ghosts of his victims have finally found him. Tonight, 6 decades of careful hiding come to their inevitable end. This is Operation Last Waltz. The night Mossad turned a granddaughter's joyous wedding celebration into an execution chamber for a monster who believed that time itself had made him untouchable. What follows is a story of patience spanning 6 decades, of memory that refused to fade, and of justice delivered in the most unlikely of settings. Viktor Brenner was born on March 15, 1922, in the Austrian town of Linz, the same city that shaped Adolf Hitler's youth and early political awakening. His father managed a small brewery that had been in the family for 3 generations. His mother taught piano to children of the local bourgeoisie, instilling in young Viktor an appreciation for discipline, order, and cultural refinement that would later find darker expression. Young Viktor excelled in school from his earliest years, demonstrating remarkable aptitude for mathematics, administrative organization, and commanding others. Teachers noted in their reports his methodical nature, his obsessive attention to detail, and his unsettling ability to inspire both fierce loyalty and paralyzing fear among classmates. He was never popular in any conventional sense, but he was always respected and obeyed without question. When Germany annexed Austria in March 1938, 16-year-old Viktor stood among cheering crowds watching the Wehrmacht march triumphantly through Linz's ancient streets. He wept openly with joy, his pale blue eyes fixed on the swastika banners. Within days, he joined the Hitler Youth, rising through ranks with characteristic efficiency. By 1940, he was accepted into the Waffen-SS. Instructors evaluated him as ideologically reliable, administratively gifted, and appropriately ruthless. That phrase, appropriately ruthless, would define everything that followed. At Subcamp Gunskirchen, which he commanded from January 1943 until liberation in May 1945, Brenner implemented what he called rational population management. Prisoners too weak to work were not simply killed. First, they were stripped of remaining valuables. Gold teeth were extracted by prisoner dentists under SS supervision. Hair was shaved for industrial use. Only then were they marched to execution pits or loaded onto transports to extermination facilities. Brenner kept meticulous records documenting each death with the cold precision of factory inventory management. Every morning at exactly 6 a.m., he conducted what prisoners called the selection walk, moving through barracks carrying a riding crop, tapping the shoulders of those selected for death that day. One survivor, A Hungarian Jew named Imre Goldstein, who would later become crucial to Mossad's investigation decades later, remembered Brenner's eyes with particular horror. They were pale blue, almost colorless, like ice that had never known warmth. When he looked at you, it was like being examined by something that had never been human. He smiled while deciding who would die. He actually smiled. By war's end, camp records documented 4,731 deaths under Brenner's command. Post-war investigators estimated the true number exceeded 6,000 souls, with many killings never recorded. As Allied forces closed in during spring 1945, Brenner understood with cold clarity that his meticulous record-keeping had become his death warrant. On April 28th, 4 days before American forces liberated Gunskirchen, he slipped away to an isolated farmhouse where he had hidden civilian clothes, expertly forged documents, and gold extracted from his victims over 2 years. Wilhelm Brunner was a real person, a textile worker from Graz who died of tuberculosis in 1943, leaving no close relatives. Brenner had obtained his documents through SS connections and spent months perfecting Brunner's signature, memorizing his family history, adopting his regional dialect. For 3 years after the war, the new Wilhelm Brunner survived in shadows. He worked as a farm laborer, then factory hand, never staying anywhere long enough to invite scrutiny. He grew a thick beard, gained weight, let his posture soften from military precision to civilian weariness. Then Brenner made the calculation that would define 6 decades and ultimately lead to his death. While thousands of Nazi fugitives fled to South America through infamous rat lines, he chose differently. Running attracted attention. Living among other fugitives meant constant vulnerability. But hiding in plain sight, building respectability so thick no one would ever look beneath, that was permanent safety. Using hidden gold, he purchased a small textile workshop in Salzburg in 1948. He worked 18-hour days, cultivating relationships with local officials. He married war widow Helga Steininger in 1951, a quiet woman who asked no questions about his past. He joined the Catholic Church, attended Mass regularly, made conspicuous charitable donations. By 1960, Wilhelm Brunner was a respected businessman. By 1970, wealthy and influential. By 1980, among Salzburg's most prominent citizens. He received Austria's Silver Medal of Honor in 1985. Most perversely, he gave generously to Holocaust memorial funds. The monster had not merely survived, he had prospered beyond imagination. For nearly 6 decades, Viktor Brenner achieved complete erasure. No investigators connected Wilhelm Brunner to the vanished SS officer. Austrian authorities, many with their own complicated wartime histories, never questioned his identity. But in a small apartment in Haifa, Israel, the ghosts of Gunskirchen refused to rest. Imre Goldstein had survived the camp, the death marches, the displaced persons camps. He emigrated to Israel in 1949, married fellow survivor Hannah, raised 3 children who became a doctor, teacher, and engineer. He rarely spoke of his experiences but never forgot. One face haunted him across decades. The pale-eyed commandant who selected his father and brother for execution on a frozen February morning. In 1997, Goldstein received a letter from a niece researching family history. Included was a 1943 photograph of SS-Hauptsturmführer Viktor Brenner from personnel files. He stared at it for hours, hands trembling. Something nagged beyond old memories, recent recognition he couldn't place. Then it surfaced. 3 years earlier, at a textile conference in Salzburg, he had been introduced to Wilhelm Brunner. Something about the man had disturbed him then, but he dismissed it as general discomfort in Austria. Now, comparing the SS photograph with a newspaper clipping showing Brunner receiving an award, he understood. The eyes. Those pale, almost colorless eyes. They were unmistakably the same. With certainty born of 55 years of nightmares, Goldstein knew. Wilhelm Brunner was Viktor Brenner. Goldstein contacted the Simon Wiesenthal Center in Vienna. Investigators recognized the identification's significance, but understood its limitations. A survivor's recognition wouldn't sustain prosecution without documentary evidence. 2 years of investigation yielded compelling circumstantial evidence, but no definitive proof. Brenner had chosen his stolen identity with diabolical care. By 1999, Austrian prosecutors dismissed the case. Justice had failed again. But the file reached a desk in Tel Aviv belonging to an organization operating under very different rules. Mossad's Nazi hunting unit maintained legacy files on documented war criminals who escaped justice. Viktor Brenner's file existed since 1961, marked location unknown. Now dramatically updated. Alive in Salzburg, perhaps 5 years of natural life remaining. The question was ancient. What purpose would assassination serve when natural death was imminent? For survivors who devoted their lives to Holocaust remembrance, the answer was absolute. Every day Brenner lived in comfort insulted his victims. Every grandchild's embrace perpetuated his escape. The principle that murderers could not outlive justice mattered beyond any calculation. Authorization came from the highest levels. Operation Last Waltz was approved. Planning began in early 2001. Brenner was too old and established for extraction. The decision: elimination appearing completely natural, leaving no evidence of foreign involvement. For 2 years, operatives studied Wilhelm Brunner with scientific patience. They mapped daily routines, documented medical appointments, infiltrated his business through front companies, cultivated sources among household staff. The breakthrough came in early 2003. Granddaughter Katharina planned a September wedding at Schloss Leopoldskron, the magnificent Baroque castle famous from the sound of music. 400 guests would attend. The wedding presented unique opportunity. Security would focus on paparazzi, not assassination teams. The crowd provided cover. Brunner, emotional and celebrating, would be least vigilant. Most importantly, symbolic resonance. Brenner had denied victims the chance to see grandchildren, murdered entire family lines. Now he would die at his greatest familial joy, surrounded by descendants whose existence mocked the thousands of families he had prevented from ever existing. The irony was deliberate. The justice was poetic. Among operatives assembled was 71-year-old Ruth Kanner. Her inclusion surprised younger team members. They did not know her history. Born Ruth Weiss in 1932 in Brno, Czechoslovakia, she was deported with her family to Gunskirchen in January 1944. She was 11 years old. She was 12 when Soviet forces liberated the camp, alone, weighing barely 30 kilograms. Her parents were selected for death by Viktor Brenner during their first week. Ruth watched from hiding behind older prisoners as her mother and father were marched to a pit and shot. Brenner himself fired the first rounds. Ruth survived through invisibility, making herself useful as a messenger, small enough to go unnoticed. After liberation, she emigrated to Israel, married, raised 3 children, built a career as an elementary school teacher. She never spoke publicly about the camp, but she never stopped watching for Brenner's face. In 1989, Mossad recruited her as a consultant for Nazi identification. Her memory for faces was extraordinary. Hypertemesia, the rare ability to recall events in exceptional detail. She had confirmed identifications of 3 war criminals subsequently captured. When Goldstein's file arrived, Ruth studied the photographs for hours. Her verdict came in a voice carrying 6 decades of waiting. "That is the man who murdered my parents. I am absolutely certain." Ruth requested inclusion in the operation. Her role? Final confirmation, seeing Brenner in person before elimination. Leadership initially refused, concerned about emotional compromise. Her response changed their minds. "I have waited 60 years for this moment. I will look into his eyes, confirm identity, and watch him understand that the dead have finally found him. I ask only to be present when the monster learns he was never truly safe." Her request was granted. September 21st, 2003. Salzburg glowed in late summer warmth. At Schloss Leopoldskron, florists had arranged 10,000 white roses. Caterers prepared Austrian delicacies. A 16-piece orchestra rehearsed waltzes. Among service staff were 7 Mossad operatives using identities constructed over 18 months. 2 posed as string quartet members, instruments containing concealed communication equipment. 1 assisted the wedding photographer, his camera transmitting encrypted images to a command post 3 kilometers away. 2 served champagne while mapping security positions. The 7th, physician David, carried the execution instrument. A syringe with synthetic compound mimicking natural heart failure. Undetectable by toxicology, absorbed through skin contact, death in 4 to 6 hours. His cover, Munich cardiologist whose invitation came through a genuine patient connection. Ruth Kanner arrived at 4:47 p.m. in elegant gray dress, carrying herself with the dignity of Austrian old money. Her eyes swept the crowd methodically until finding the target. Wilhelm Brunner stood near the garden entrance, surrounded by family. He looked like any prosperous grandfather, overwhelmed, proud, occasionally dabbing at his eyes. His wife Helga held his arm. Great-grandchildren ran around his legs. Ruth watched for several minutes, then spoke into the brooch containing her microphone. Visual confirmation. Primary target present. Moving to closer approach for final verification. Through her concealed earpiece. Proceed when ready. All elements standing by. Ruth approached Wilhelm Brunner at 5:23 p.m. during cocktails. The sun descended toward the Alps, casting golden light across the terrace. Brunner had momentarily separated from family, standing alone near a balustrade. "Herr Brunner," Ruth said, her German carrying slight Czech inflection from childhood. He turned with the automatic smile of a man accustomed to social attention. "Yes?" "I wanted to congratulate you on your granddaughter's wedding. Such a beautiful ceremony." "Thank you, very kind." He studied her with polite uncertainty. "I don't believe we've met." "We haven't. I'm Margaret Hoffman, but I feel I know you." Ruth paused, eyes fixed on his. "I knew someone from your hometown, from Gunskirchen." The name landed like a stone in still water. His expression flickered, barely perceptibly, before returning to neutral. But Ruth saw it. Recognition breaking through 60 years of careful construction. "I don't know what you mean. I'm from Graz." "Of course. Memory plays tricks at our age, doesn't it, Herr Hauptsturmführer?" The SS rank hung in the air. His face went pale. His hand trembled. In his colorless eyes, Ruth saw what she had waited 60 years to witness. Pure, undiluted fear. "I don't know what you're talking about. I remember you clearly. You selected my parents for death on January 23, 1944. It was snowing. You wore your winter coat with fur collar. You smiled while you did it." His mouth opened. No words emerged. "I have waited my entire life for this moment. I wanted you to know before the end. We never forgot. You were never safe. The dead always remember." She turned and walked away. Behind her, barely audible. "Unmöglich. Impossible." Into her microphone. Identity confirmed. "Viktor Brenner. Proceed." Dr. David approached at 6:15 p.m. as guests moved toward dinner. Brunner had rejoined family but remained ashen. His wife asked if he felt unwell. "Herr Brunner, I'm Dr. Weber, cardiologist. I noticed you looked pale. Are you all right?" Brunner's haunted eyes focused slowly. "Just tired. Emotional day." "May I check your pulse? Professional habit." Brunner extended his arm. David pressed fingers to his wrist for several seconds. Slightly elevated, but nothing concerning for a proud grandfather. "Congratulations." Contact lasted 8 seconds. The compound absorbed through skin. The machinery of justice, set in motion decades ago in Gunskirchen's frozen mud, completed its circuit. Brenner would feel nothing unusual for hours. He would give his toast, dance with his granddaughter. After midnight, his heart would simply stop. But he would die knowing he was found. Ruth's words would be the last meaningful thing he heard. Wilhelm Brunner delivered his toast at 8:45 p.m. His voice trembled. He spoke of family legacy, of love across generations. Ruth watched from a corner. She felt not satisfaction, but the weight of completed obligation, the exhaustion of memory carried too long. After the toast, Brunner danced with Katharina. The orchestra played Strauss. She smiled radiantly, unaware her grandfather had once selected human beings for death. At 11:30 p.m., operatives extracted. By midnight, no trace remained. Brunner retired at 12:45 a.m. At 4:17 a.m., his heart stopped. His wife found him at 7:30 a.m. The physician certified natural causes, cardiac arrest in an 81-year-old with heart disease. The funeral drew 1,000 mourners. Eulogies praised his achievements, philanthropy, devotion to family. No one mentioned Gunskirchen. Viktor Brenner was buried with full honors. His tombstone: beloved husband, father, and grandfather. A life of service. The truth lies elsewhere, in sealed archives, fading survivor memories, and the knowledge of those who ensured murder has consequences. Operation Last Waltz was never acknowledged. Within months, elderly men across Europe with suspicious pasts hired security or rarely left home. The message was received. Imre Goldstein died in 2007, having learned his testimony was crucial. Ruth Kanner returned to Haifa. Those who knew her noticed a change, lightness in her step, willingness to speak about her childhood that had been absent for 60 years. She died in 2015. Her obituary mentioned teaching, family, not Gunskirchen, not Viktor Brenner. Some stories end in private, known only to those who needed to know. The lesson of Operation Last Waltz is not tradecraft. It is memory itself. Brenner believed time would erase his crimes. He underestimated survivors. He didn't account for Goldstein, who remembered those eyes for 55 years. He didn't anticipate Ruth, whose memory made forgetting impossible. Memory is humanity's oldest weapon. Technology changes. The fundamental refusal to let evil go unanswered does not. This is the victory of Operation Last Waltz. Not one death, but demonstration that memory outlasts those who would destroy it. If this moved you, subscribe and turn on notifications. Drop a like if some stories deserve telling. Your question: when legal systems fail, is covert action justified? Or does extrajudicial killing undermine principles we defend? See you in the next investigation. The aftermath of Operation Last Waltz rippled quietly through communities harboring elderly men with murky pasts. In Vienna, Munich, and Buenos Aires, certain individuals suddenly installed security systems, relocated to isolated locations, or stopped appearing in public. None were ever officially identified or prosecuted, but something had changed, a reminder that certain debts could never be outlived. Within the intelligence community, the operation became a subject of professional admiration and ethical debate. Execution was flawless. No forensic evidence, no diplomatic incidents, no exposed operatives. But questions remained about whether resources were justified for an elderly target near natural death. Others argued the symbolic value transcended calculations, demonstrating that escape was never permanent. For the Brunner family, grief continued as entirely ordinary. Katharina named her first son Wilhelm. The family maintained the business, donated to the same charities. They never learned the truth, that the grandfather who bounced them on his knee had selected thousands for murder, that the elegant woman at the wedding was a survivor of his camp, that the cardiologist delivered death through an innocent touch. Perhaps this was the operation's cruelty, or its mercy. The innocent were spared knowledge that would have shattered their understanding of family and identity. They were allowed to grieve a man they believed was good. But Viktor Brenner died knowing he had been found. He died with Ruth's words echoing, "We never forgot, you were never safe, the dead always remember." Perhaps that knowledge in those final hours was punishment enough. Perhaps terror while listening to his own heartbeat, wondering when it would stop, was justice no courtroom could provide. Or perhaps nothing could ever be enough for 4,731 deaths, families erased, children never born. These questions have no resolution. The same questions humanity has grappled with since the first courts attempted to address unprecedented evil. What Operation Last Waltz demonstrated is that memory itself is justice, imperfect but enduring. Goldstein remembered, and his memory reached those who could act. Ruth remembered, providing final confirmation after 60 years. The dead of Gunskirchen cannot speak. Their voices were silenced in execution pits. But they are remembered by survivors, and through remembrance, they continue influencing a world that tried to forget them. And somewhere in Haifa, Ruth Kanner could finally sleep without seeing Brenner's eyes in her dreams. The girl who hid while watching her parents die became the woman who told the monster that the dead always remember. That transformation, from helpless witness to agent of justice, may be the operation's most profound victory. Not one death, but affirmation that survivors are witnesses whose memories become instruments through which the murdered receive accounting. The Baroque castle still hosts celebrations. Guests dancing there have no idea what transpired in September 2003. The moment passed into history, unrecorded, unknown except to those who carry the secret to their graves. But the memory endures, and that, perhaps, is enough.